I won $1.8 million in the lottery, but when I refused to hand half to my parents' precious daughter, they burned what they thought was my check. I laughed as their plan went up in smoke. They had no idea I'd already moved the money, and that was just the beginning of my revenge. My name is Sarah Collins, and for 28 years, I was the shadow in my own family's story. While my younger sister Madison sparkled like the crown jewel she'd always been, I remained the reliable backup, the one who cleaned up messes, remembered birthdays, and never asked for anything in return. Madison was everything our parents adored: homecoming queen, straight-A student, daddy's precious angel. When she graduated high school, they bought her a brand new Honda Civic with a bright red bow. When I finished my MBA with honors 2 years later, they gave me a distracted, "Congratulations," over leftover pizza. I worked as a receptionist at Riverside Dental Associates while studying business part-time. Every paycheck went straight into savings. I'd been working since 16, squirreling away money like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. My parents, Robert and Linda Collins, treated me like furniture, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. Madison breezed through life expecting everything to be handed to her, and somehow, it always was. I learned early that love in our house came with conditions, and apparently, I never met them. But I kept my head down, worked hard, and told myself that someday things would be different. I had no idea how right I was, or how wrong everything would go first. The change started on an ordinary Tuesday evening in March. I'd just finished a brutal 10-hour day at the dental office, dealing with screaming kids and insurance claims. On my way home, I stopped at Murphy's gas station for a Diet Coke and some of those terrible nachos I secretly loved. The scratch-off tickets sat behind the counter like tiny promises wrapped in silver foil. I'd never been a gambler, too practical, too careful with money. But something about that day felt different. Maybe it was the way the cashier smiled, or maybe I was just tired of playing it safe. "Give me one of those $20 winners," I said, pointing to the gold tickets. 20 minutes later, sitting in my 10-year-old Toyota Camry, I scratched away the silver coating with a penny from my cup holder. The numbers aligned like stars finally falling into place. $1,800,000. But that was just the beginning of the story, and the end of the family I thought I knew. I stared at that ticket until my hands shook. The parking lot lights cast everything in an orange glow, and I wondered if I was hallucinating from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But the numbers didn't change. $1,800,000. The next morning, I drove to the State Lottery Commission office in downtown Portland. My heart hammered against my ribs as the official validated my ticket with the kind of smile reserved for life-changing moments. After taxes and choosing the lump sum, I'd walk away with roughly $1.3 million. For the first time in my life, I had options. Real ones. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. Instead, I spent 2 weeks being smarter than I'd ever been. I consulted with Marcus Rodriguez, a financial advisor who specialized in sudden wealth syndrome. We set up a trust, opened private investment accounts, and created a plan that would secure my future for decades. "Take your time telling people," Marcus advised during our final meeting. "Money changes relationships in ways you can't predict." I should have listened more carefully to that warning. 2 weeks later, I finally broke the news over Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Mom had made her famous pot roast, the one she only prepared for special occasions, though she didn't know yet just how special this one would be. "I have some incredible news," I announced, setting down my fork. I won the lottery. $1,800,000. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Mom's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Dad stopped chewing mid-bite. Madison looked up from her phone for the first time all evening, her perfectly manicured eyebrows arching with sudden interest. "Well," Mom finally said, her voice carrying that artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Honey, you know Madison's been having such a hard time since her breakup with Tyler. She could really use some help getting back on her feet." Dad nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Family takes care of family, Sarah. It's only right that you share this blessing. Maybe give Madison half. She's got student loans, and you know how expensive rent is these days." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not surprise, I'd lived with these people long enough to know who they really were. But confirmation still hurt. Madison didn't even pretend to be grateful. She shrugged like I'd offered her a stick of gum. Yeah, that seems fair. I mean, what do you even need all that money for? You don't have debt, you don't have a mortgage. You're basically just sitting around. That's when I knew. After 28 years, I finally understood that to them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was a resource to be tapped when convenient. But they had no idea who they were really dealing with. I set my fork down carefully, the kind of deliberate movement that comes before life-altering decisions. The pot roast suddenly tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I'm not giving half to anyone, I said quietly. This money is mine. I've worked hard my entire life, saved every penny, and now I'm going to use it to build the future I want. I don't owe anyone anything. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom's face shifted from fake sweetness to something harder, more familiar. Oh, Sarah, don't be ridiculous. You're being incredibly selfish. Ungrateful, Dad added, his voice rising. After everything we've done for you, after raising you, feeding you, putting a roof over your head, this is how you repay us. Madison rolled her eyes dramatically. God, Sarah, it's not like you earned it. You literally just got lucky. The least you could do is help family. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something deeper, something that had been building for 28 years. I'm going home, I said. Don't you dare walk away from this conversation, Dad barked, but I was already grabbing my purse. We're not done talking about this, Mom called after me as I headed for the door. But we were more done than they could possibly imagine. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of smoke. I threw on my bathrobe and rushed outside, expecting to see a neighbor's barbecue or maybe someone burning leaves. Instead, I found my parents and Madison standing around a metal trash can in my own backyard, flames dancing inside like some twisted family bonfire. What the hell are you doing? I shouted, running toward them in my slippers. Mom turned to me with the most satisfied smile I'd ever seen on her face. If you won't share, then you won't get a penny. We burned your lottery check. Hope you're happy now. Madison actually laughed, a cold, triumphant sound that made my skin crawl. Maybe next time you'll think twice about being so greedy. Dad crossed his arms, looking proud of their little arson party. Sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way. I stared at the ashes floating up from the barrel, and then I did something that caught all three of them completely off guard. I burst out laughing. Not the polite chuckle I'd perfected over the years, but deep, genuine laughter that came from somewhere I didn't know existed. They stared at me like I'd lost my mind, which maybe I had, or maybe I'd finally found it. You really thought, I gasped between laughs, that I'd leave a $1,800,000 check just lying around the house. Their triumphant expressions began to falter. That was a ceremonial copy, you idiots. The real payment was electronically transferred to my private account 2 weeks ago. I've already moved most of it into investments. The color drained from Madison's face. Mom's mouth fell open like a broken hinge. Dad looked like someone had just told him Santa Claus wasn't real. You didn't just burn my future, I continued, my laughter fading into something sharper. You proved everything I've always known about this family. I was never your daughter, I was just a means to an end. I turned around and walked back into my house, leaving them standing there with their smoking barrel of failure. But I knew this was far from over. That afternoon, I packed everything that mattered into 2 suitcases. It wasn't much, I'd never been one for collecting things, and now I understood why. Somewhere deep down, I'd always known I'd need to leave. I booked a room at the Hampton Inn across town and called Rebecca Martinez, the real estate agent who'd helped me set up my new financial accounts. By the next morning, I had appointments to see 3 different apartments in neighborhoods where my family would never think to look. I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. The text started a week later. First from Madison, Sarah, come on, we're family. Can't we work this out? Then Mom, honey, I think we all said things we didn't mean. Let's have dinner and talk. Finally Dad, this is ridiculous. You're tearing the family apart over money. I didn't respond to any of them. I'd changed my phone number, but somehow they kept getting through with new numbers, fake accounts, friends' phones. The messages grew more desperate, then angry, then threatening. "You're going to regret this," Madison texted from what looked like her boyfriend's phone. "You can't just abandon your family and expect no consequences." When I didn't answer, they escalated. I was settling into my new apartment, a beautiful one-bedroom with hardwood floors and a view of the river, when I heard the pounding. Not on my door, but on the building's main entrance 3 floors below. Through my window, I could see Dad's red pickup truck parked illegally in the fire lane. "Sarah," his voice echoed off the buildings. "Sarah Collins, get down here right now." Other residents were peering out their windows. Someone was definitely calling the police. I stayed back from my window, watching as Dad continued his tantrum like a toddler who'd been denied candy. Mom and Madison sat in the truck, Madison recording everything on her phone like this was some kind of social media content. The entitlement was breathtaking. They actually thought public humiliation would make me cave. 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars arrived. I watched the officers escort my family away from the property, Dad still shouting about ungrateful daughters and family obligations. The whole neighborhood got a show. I thought that would be the end of it. They'd humiliated themselves, made their point, and hopefully learned that I wasn't coming back. 3 weeks later, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a legal notice from Hartwell Associates, a local law firm. My parents were suing me for emotional distress and breach of verbal contract regarding promised financial support. I read the papers twice, then a third time, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They were actually claiming that I'd promised to give Madison half my winnings, and that my refusal was causing them psychological damage. The audacity was almost impressive. I called my lawyer immediately. Thomas Hartwell, no relation to their firm, had handled all my trust paperwork and came highly recommended by Marcus, my financial advisor. "Don't worry," Thomas said after I read him the filing over the phone. "This is a desperate Hail Mary. They have no case, no evidence, and no leg to stand on. We'll shut this down quickly." But as I hung up the phone, I realized this wasn't really about winning or losing in court. This was about something much deeper, about what people will do when they realize they've lost control over someone they never really saw as human. The real war was just beginning. The courthouse smelled like old wood and broken dreams. I sat in the hallway outside family court wearing my best navy suit, the one I'd bought for job interviews that never came. My hair was pulled back in a professional bun, makeup minimal but polished. I looked like someone who had her life together. Across the hall, my family clustered like conspirators planning a heist. Madison wore a dress that would have been more appropriate for a nightclub, her heels clicking against the marble floor every time she shifted. Mom had gone for the grieving mother look, tissues clutched in her hand, eyes red from what I assumed was strategically timed tears. Dad just looked angry, like the world owed him an explanation. They'd brought their lawyer, a thin man with a nervous energy who kept checking his watch. I'd brought Thomas, calm, experienced, and completely unimpressed by their amateur hour production. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williamson," the bailiff announced. Judge Williamson was exactly what you'd want in a judge, sharp eyes, no-nonsense demeanor, and the kind of expression that suggested she'd seen every type of family drama possible and had patience for none of it. Their lawyer went first, painting a picture of a greedy daughter who'd abandoned her struggling family after promising to share her windfall. He talked about verbal contracts and moral obligations, about how my sudden wealth had driven me to cruel betrayal. Then Mom took the stand. The tears came on cue, along with a story about how I'd promised dear Madison that I'd help her get back on her feet. She talked about family values and disappointment, about how they'd failed as parents because they'd raised someone so selfish. It was an Oscar-worthy performance, complete with trembling voice and strategic pauses for effect. Dad's testimony was angrier, more direct. He claimed I'd explicitly agreed to give Madison at least half of my winnings, and that my refusal was destroying the family unit they'd worked so hard to build. Madison's performance was the most galling. She played the victim perfectly, the struggling young woman whose own sister had abandoned her in her time of need. She talked about student loans that didn't exist. She dropped out of college after one semester and rent she couldn't afford. She lived with our parents. But the real moment came when their lawyer asked her directly, "Did your sister promise to share her lottery winnings with you?" Madison looked right at me, her eyes filled with crocodile tears, and said, she promised she'd take care of me. She said family comes first, and that she'd make sure I was okay. I trusted her. It was such a complete lie that I actually admired the commitment to the fiction. Then it was our turn. Thomas was methodical, precise, and absolutely devastating. He presented bank records showing that I'd never promised anything to anyone. The money had been moved and invested within days of winning, with no consultation or discussion with family members. He produced the timeline: lottery win on March 15th, official validation on March 16th, trust establishment on March 18th, family dinner announcement on March 30th. 2 full weeks of financial planning without a single mention of sharing. But the kill shot came when he played the recording. I'd forgotten about it until Thomas asked if I had any evidence of the actual conversation. Then I remembered, my phone had been recording a voice memo for my business class when I'd arrived at Sunday dinner. I'd never bothered to stop the recording. The judge listened to the entire 43-minute audio file, my announcement, their immediate demands, my refusal, and their threats. Every word was crystal clear, including Madison's dismissive, "What do you even need it for?" and Dad's demand that I give away half my winnings. No promises, no agreements, just greed, entitlement, and the sound of a family imploding in real time. The judge called a 15-minute recess. When she returned, her expression had shifted from professional neutrality to barely contained disgust. "Case dismissed," she said firmly. "And let me be clear, any further frivolous lawsuits from the plaintiffs regarding this matter will result in sanctions. The court finds no evidence of promised financial support and substantial evidence of harassment." Their lawyer was packing his briefcase before she finished speaking. I should have felt triumphant walking out of that courtroom. Instead, I felt hollow. Winning didn't undo the damage, it just made it official. Outside, Mom made one last attempt. "Sarah, honey, can't we just—" "No," I said, not slowing down. "We can't." That night, I wrote the letter that would end everything. I wrote the letter by hand on cream-colored stationery I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Every word was chosen carefully, like ammunition for a war one never wanted to fight but was determined to finish. "Dear Mom and Dad, this is the last communication you will ever receive from me. When I won the lottery, I gave you a chance to be happy for me, to celebrate that something good had finally happened to your daughter who had worked quietly in the background for 28 years. Instead, you immediately calculated what you could take from me. You demanded I give half my winnings to Madison, as if my success belonged to her by default. When I refused, you tried to destroy what you thought was my ticket to a better life. When that failed, you dragged me to court with lies and fake tears, hoping a judge would force me to fund Madison's lifestyle. You didn't just prove you were willing to betray me for money. You proved that you never saw me as your daughter, only as a resource to be exploited when convenient and ignored otherwise. I spent my entire childhood and adult life hoping that someday you might value me for who I am rather than what I could provide. That hope is dead now, and honestly, it's a relief. I am cutting all ties permanently. I've changed my phone number, my address, and my name will soon follow. Any attempts to contact me will be handled through legal channels. Madison, if you're reading this over their shoulders like I know you are, you once told me I'd never be more than a footnote in your fabulous life. You were right, but not in the way you thought. I'm not your footnote anymore. I'm the author of my own story now, and you're not in it. Don't look for me. Don't contact me. Don't expect Christmas cards or wedding invitations or funeral attendance. We are strangers now, and that's exactly how I want it. Goodbye forever, Sarah. I drove to their house and slipped the letter under the front door at 3 a.m. when I knew they'd all be asleep. I didn't want a confrontation, I wanted finality. The next morning, I started the legal process to change my name from Sarah Collins to Sarah Mitchell, my grandmother's maiden name. She'd been the only person in my extended family who ever saw me as more than background decoration. I also made an appointment with a therapist named Dr. Jennifer Reyes, who specialized in family estrangement and emotional recovery. Our first session was brutal but necessary. Grief isn't just for death, she explained during our third meeting. You're mourning the family you wish you'd had, and that's completely normal. But you're also celebrating the freedom to become who you really are. She was right on both counts. Within 6 months, I'd launched Mitchell Consulting, a small business helping other companies streamline their operations. My first client was Dr. Patterson from Riverside Dental. He'd always appreciated my organizational skills and was happy to pay for them properly. I also adopted a dog from the local rescue shelter. Her name was Luna, a 3-year-old golden retriever mix with mismatched ears and an absolute devotion to whoever happened to be holding her leash. She'd been returned twice by families who found her too needy. I understood the feeling. Between Honeycrisp and Gala apples, when I heard the familiar voice behind me. Well, look who's shopping at Whole Foods now. I turned around slowly. Madison stood there with a shopping cart containing organic kale, quinoa, and other expensive health foods. She looked exactly the same, perfectly highlighted hair, designer workout clothes, the kind of casual outfit that cost more than most people's rent. Madison, I said calmly, dropping 2 Honeycrisp apples into my basket. So this is what winning the lottery looks like. She gestured at my jeans and Northwestern University sweatshirt. Kind of underwhelming. I'm happy, I said simply. Something in my tone must have caught her off guard because her smirk faltered slightly. Mom and Dad ask about you sometimes. I hope they're well. That's it. That's all you have to say. I studied her face, looking for some sign of the sister I'd once hoped we could be. But there was nothing there except the same entitled expectation that the world owed her something. What did you want me to say, Madison? Did you want me to apologize for not funding your lifestyle? Did you want me to come crawling back and beg to be part of a family that only valued me as a bank account? You broke Mom's heart, she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. Mom broke her own heart when she chose money over her daughter. You all did. Madison's expression hardened. You know what? You're right. We're all better off without your drama. Enjoy your lonely little life with your perfect apartment and your stupid dog. I will, I said, and meant it. She stormed off, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished concrete floor. I finished my shopping in peace. That night, I called Dr. Reyes and told her about the encounter. How do you feel? She asked. Free, I said. Finally, completely free. And I was. 6 months later, I expanded Mitchell Consulting and hired 2 employees. My business was thriving, built on the foundation of respect and fair compensation, everything my family had never understood. I traveled to Scotland for 2 weeks, hiking through the Highlands with Luna and taking photographs of landscapes that looked like paintings. I learned to paddleboard on the Columbia River. I took a cooking class and discovered I was actually decent at making fresh pasta. I dated a veterinarian named Alex who thought Luna was the best dog in the world and never once asked how much money I had. On our 3rd date, I told him about the lottery, not as a confession or a test, but as simple fact. He said, good for you, and asked if I wanted to split dessert. Most importantly, I learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. For the first time in my life, I enjoyed my own company. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about what might have happened if my family had reacted differently to my news. If they'd been happy for me. If they'd celebrated instead of calculated. If they'd seen me as a person worth loving instead of a resource worth exploiting. But those thoughts came less frequently now, and when they did, I didn't feel sad. I felt grateful that the true nature had been revealed so clearly, and grateful that I'd found the strength to walk away. The lottery ticket had given me financial freedom, but cutting ties with my family had given me something infinitely more valuable, the freedom to become myself. Some people win money. I'd won something better. I'd won the right to choose who deserved a place in my life, and the courage to say no to people who didn't. 3 years later, standing on my own front porch with Luna at my side and Alex's engagement ring sparkling on my finger, I understood something my family never would. The real jackpot wasn't the money I'd won. It was the life I'd built after I stopped begging people to see my worth and started believing in it myself. Some victories come with fanfare and fireworks. Mine came in quiet moments of self-respect, in boundaries held firm, and in the simple joy of being seen and loved for exactly who I was. That was worth more than any lottery ticket ever printed.